Right now, there is a clock ticking inside the United States Treasury. It is not counting up, it is counting down. And when it hits zero, 70 million Americans will wake up to find that their monthly income has been slashed by 24% overnight. No vote, no warning letter, no negotiation, just an automatic cut, hardwired into law, triggered the moment the money runs out. That moment has a date. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the Social Security Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund will exhaust its reserves by fiscal year 2032. Not 2050, not sometime in the future. 6 years from today, when that trust fund hits zero, the program is legally prohibited from borrowing a single dollar. It cannot run a deficit. It cannot issue bonds. It can only pay out what it collects in real time from payroll taxes. And those taxes will cover roughly 77 cents of every dollar owed. For the average retiree collecting $2,000 a month, that means a loss of $460 every single month for the rest of their life. This is not a partisan talking point. This is arithmetic. And it is confirmed by the program's own actuaries, by the CBO's February 2026 budget outlook, and by the Social Security Administration's Board of Trustees. 3 independent projections. 1 conclusion. The fund is draining and Congress has done nothing to stop it. But here is what makes this story far more dangerous than a retirement problem. Social Security is not failing in isolation. It is failing inside a fiscal environment that is itself on the edge of structural collapse. The national debt crossed $38.5 trillion in February 2026. It is growing at $6.43 billion per day. That is $267 million per hour, $4.46 million per minute, $74,378 every second you have been watching this video. And the CBO projects that within a decade, annual deficits will balloon to $3.1 trillion, pushing total federal debt to $63 trillion. By 2030, the debt to GDP ratio will hit 108%, surpassing the record set in the aftermath of World War II. Social Security is not just running out of money. It is running out of money inside a government that is itself running out of room to borrow. And no one in Washington is telling you the full picture. Until now. To understand how 70 million Americans ended up 6 years away from a benefit cut that no one voted for, we need to go back to 1983. That is the year Congress last fixed Social Security. And the fix contained a flaw that took 4 decades to detonate. In 1983, Social Security was weeks from missing its first payment. President Reagan and Speaker Tip O'Neill brokered a bipartisan rescue, raised the payroll tax, gradually pushed the retirement age from 65 to 67, and start taxing a portion of benefits for higher earners. The package worked. It generated decades of surpluses, building a reserve fund that peaked near $2.8 trillion in Treasury securities. The actuaries who designed the fix projected it would keep the system solvent for 75 years, through approximately 2058. So why are we talking about insolvency in 2032? Because the actuaries built their model on one assumption that turned out to be catastrophically wrong. They assumed that wage growth would be distributed roughly the way it had always been, with about 90% of all earnings falling below the payroll tax cap. That cap, adjusted annually, sits at $184,500 in 2026. Earnings above it are not taxed for Social Security. In 1983, this seemed reasonable. Average wages were expected to grow at a steady clip across the income spectrum. Well, what actually happened was the most lopsided wage explosion in American economic history. Between 1983 and 2000, the top 6% of earners saw their real wages grow by 62%. The remaining 94% of American workers, the vast majority paying into the system, saw just 17% growth over the same period. The rich got dramatically richer. Their income soared above the cap, and Social Security never collected a dime of it. This is the structural flaw. Social Security's funding mechanism was designed for a country where prosperity was broadly shared. It is now operating inside an economy where income concentration has pulled trillions of dollars permanently out of its reach. Today, instead of 90% of earnings falling under the cap, the figure has dropped significantly, and the gap keeps widening. Every year, more income floats above the ceiling, invisible to the payroll tax. If this kind of systemic analysis resonates with you, if you are connecting these dots for the first time, subscribe and hit like. Because what we are about to cover is the part that affects you directly, regardless of your age. Layer this funding erosion on top of a demographic earthquake, and you see the full scale of the crisis. The baby boomer generation, the largest in American history, has entered peak retirement. Every day, roughly 10,000 boomers turn 65. They are living longer, collecting benefits for more years, and drawing down reserves that were never designed to support this volume. Simultaneously, the workforce paying in is shrinking. Immigration, which historically supplied millions of new payroll tax-paying workers, has been drastically curtailed. The CBO now projects that the sustainable pace of job creation could fall to near zero by 2027 simply because there are not enough new workers entering the labor force. Fewer workers paying in, more retirees drawing out, and a tax base that structurally excludes the fastest growing segment of national income. This was not a sudden crisis. It was a 40-year time bomb. And the fuse ran out faster than anyone expected because Congress chose to make it worse. In 2025, Congress passed the Social Security Fairness Act, which expanded benefits for millions of public sector retirees. On its own, the law was defensible. Teachers, firefighters, and police officers had been penalized by decades-old offset rules, but the legislation carried no funding mechanism. It simply increased the program's obligations while doing nothing to increase its revenue. According to the program's chief actuary, this single law accelerated the insolvency date. What had been projected for early 2033 moved to late 2032. That is not a trivial shift. Each year of acceleration narrows the window for reform and increases the severity of the eventual cut. And Congress was not done. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the reconciliation package signed into law, made structural changes to the taxation of Social Security benefits. The effect, according to CBO analysis, was to reduce the program's income stream further while simultaneously extending $3.9 trillion in other tax cuts. The priorities were explicit. When it came to choosing between extending tax reductions that disproportionately benefit high earners and shoring up the trust fund that 70 million Americans depend on for survival, Washington chose the tax cuts, every single time. Now zoom out. Social Security's insolvency is unfolding inside a federal budget that is itself in freefall. The national debt, as of February 2026, stands at $38.56 trillion. The Joint Economic Committee reports it is growing at $6.43 billion every single day. By April, it will cross $39 trillion. By the end of the year, it could reach $40 trillion. The CBO's latest 10-year outlook released just days ago projects the debt will hit 108% of GDP by 2030, eclipsing the World War II record and continue climbing to 120% by 2036. Annual deficits will average 6.1% of GDP over the decade, reaching 6.7% by 2036, far exceeding Treasury Secretary Bessent's stated goal of 3%. The interest payments alone now exceed $1 trillion per year. That is more than the United States spends on defense, more than it spends on Medicaid. And it is growing faster than any other line item in the federal budget. Every dollar spent servicing debt is a dollar unavailable for Social Security reform, infrastructure, education, or any other public investment. The government is not just borrowing to fund its operations. It is borrowing to pay the interest on previous borrowing. This is the definition of a debt spiral. And here is where the promises fall apart. The Department of Government Efficiency, led by Elon Musk, set a target of $2 trillion in spending cuts. The actual savings identified so far range between $1.4 and $7 billion. Not trillion, billion. That is roughly 1/3 of 1% of the stated goal. The cuts that would matter, the structural changes to entitlements, to Social Security, to Medicare, remain politically untouchable. No one in Washington is willing to tell 70 million voters that the math does not work. The Social Security Trust Fund is not gradually declining. It is being drained from both ends. Revenue is structurally suppressed because the payroll tax cannot reach the income brackets where wealth is actually growing. Expenditures are structurally elevated because the largest generation in history is retiring into a system designed for a younger, broader-based workforce. And Congress, rather than addressing either side of this equation, has actively accelerated the timeline to insolvency while piling trillions in additional debt onto a government that is already borrowing more than it did during the Second World War. For the average American household, the federal debt now amounts to $286,108. That is not an abstraction. That is a claim on your future taxes, your future services, and your future purchasing power. When the government borrows at this scale, it does not create wealth. It redistributes it, from future taxpayers to present-day bondholders, from working families to financial institutions, from the young to the old, and the bond market is starting to notice. Long-term Treasury yields have refused to fall in lockstep with the Federal Reserve's rate cuts, an unprecedented divergence going back to 1990. Bond investors are demanding a higher premium to hold American debt because they no longer trust the fiscal trajectory. If that premium keeps rising, mortgage rates stay elevated, consumer credit stays expensive, and the cost of everything from car loans to small business financing remains pinned at levels that squeeze the middle class. This is the question that should keep every American up at night. If the government cannot fund Social Security, cannot reduce the deficit, cannot control interest costs, and cannot even agree on who should lead the Federal Reserve without a political crisis, where exactly is the floor? What institution is left that you can trust to protect the value of your savings over the next decade? The CBO itself projects that inflation will not return to the Fed's 2% target until 2030. 4 more years of prices grinding higher, while wages for 94% of workers barely keep pace. Think about that timeline, and then ask yourself whether the conventional retirement playbook, the one that assumes stable benefits, low inflation, and a functioning government safety net, still makes any sense at all. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, because some of the most important analysis on this channel comes from the people watching it, and this is where it stops being about Washington. Because the consequences of this trajectory do not land on politicians, they land on you, on your paycheck, on your purchasing power, on the retirement you thought was secured. Every generation of Americans has been told the same story. Work hard, pay your taxes. The system will take care of you when you're old. That story held together for decades, not because the system was perfect, but because the assumptions underneath it W were close enough to reality. Broad wage growth, manageable debt, a tax base that captured enough national income to fund its promises. None of those assumptions hold anymore. Wages are concentrated at the top. Debt is growing at $74,000 per second, and the tax base is structurally blind to the fastest growing portion of national wealth. The system was not betrayed by any single villain. It was hollowed out by 40 years of compounding inequality that the architecture was never built to withstand. Here is what is within your control. First, understand that Social Security, even in a worst-case scenario, does not disappear. It pays roughly 77% of scheduled benefits from ongoing tax revenue. That is a significant cut, but it is not zero. Plan for that reality rather than hoping Congress will fix it at the last minute. Second, recognize what the largest institutional investors in the world are already doing. Central banks purchased record amounts of gold in 2025. China's central bank has added to its reserves for 15 consecutive months. Gold is trading above $5,000 an ounce. Silver, despite massive volatility, has more than doubled from a year ago. These are not speculative trades. They are insurance policies against exactly the kind of fiscal deterioration I've been describing. When the institutions that print money start buying hard assets, that tells you something about their confidence in the money itself. Third, and most importantly, recalibrate your expectations. The CBO's own numbers show that the debt will surpass $63 trillion within a decade. Net interest will consume over $2 trillion per year by 2036. That money comes from somewhere. It comes from services that get cut, from inflation that erodes your savings, from a currency that gradually loses its purchasing power against real assets. The 40-year playbook of relying on dollar-denominated promises is being tested in ways it has never been tested before. At the start of this video, I told you there was a clock ticking inside the United States Treasury. 6 years remain before it reaches zero for Social Security. But the deeper clock, the one measuring the structural viability of a government that borrows $2.3 trillion more every single year, has been running for far longer, and it does not reset with an election. The question was never whether these systems would be tested. The question was always whether you would see the test coming in time to prepare. Now you can see it. The math does not lie. Empires do. And the gap between what they promise and what they can deliver is where your vigilance either saves you or costs you everything.